Hello, I'm Sara, co-founder of Chorts Design, and I'm here to talk to you guys about our latest project with VBAT and Superunion. We undertook this brief for the D&AD Newblood Awards, and it challenged us to imagine or reimagine a bike hire scheme in a city of our choosing. So the brief asked us to pick a scheme and a city, well, a scheme depending on the city, and then create a brand for it. The brief specified that we shouldn't focus on what makes our bike hire special, but think more about how the branding can communicate the specialness of the bike hire. The brief also required 4 different deliverables: an identity, so a logo, color scheme, and a name. We also have to show a bike wrap and a bike stand, some examples of wayfinding, which could be anything really that shows direction of the bike and the bike stands, and then 2 additional touch points of our choosing. When I originally started brainstorming for this project, I didn't know where to go until I came up with the name BC. I knew I wanted to brand the bike hire to be located in Barcelona, which is where I was when I was brainstorming. Barcelona is a very bikeable city and has a bike share that's already very well established called VisCom. And I thought it would be interesting to see how a new brand could retake the streets of Barcelona. The idea also involved a play on words, bici being bike in Spanish and C being yes. So substituting the C for the S in order to encourage people to bike and be excited about it. I also came up with some body copy that could work as a slogan or just as additional language for the identity, which included the question EC and the answer DC. EC asks the question what if, and DC answers with say yes, which I thought could be an interesting way to experiment with language and just how the whole brand communicates. I was quite excited about this idea, and even though I'd had some other original brainstorms while discussing with my family, more about visuals than about concept, I knew that this was the way I had to go. I was very excited about this concept. After coming up with my concept, I decided to undertake some initial research. I thought that, and I still think that having some research and points of references is the best way to start any project, since it allows you to see what's been done, what hasn't been done, and how you can push the limits. I knew that Barcelona is currently changing their regulations for your transportation in regards to climate change. They want to reduce the amount of pollution created, so cars that exceed a certain level of gases and pollution they create are no longer allowed to circulate around Barcelona. This is a good incentive to change into a bike hire scheme, and I thought it was important to highlight throughout my identity how biking can help the entire city and how it fits with the panorama of the city already. I also conducted some initial research with VisCom, the current bike hire in Barcelona. VisCom is a company that was founded in 2007 and has taken over the streets of Barcelona completely. Their stands everywhere you go, and it's very easy to access. They have over 420 stands and 6,000 bikes, which is quite a large amount, but could be bigger for a city as big as Barcelona. VisCom offers a climate-friendly way to travel, while also eliminating noise and traffic congestion in the city. Because of this, VisCom is very highly recommended by public transport and by the officials of Barcelona. I also looked into other bike hires such as Burl Bikes. Burl Bikes has collaborations all around the country and have recently started working with the BCP Council in order to have Burl Bikes in Bournemouth and Poole. The This summer, over 50 bikes were added during around this area and have been functioning ever since, and there's plans to add over 1,000 more bikes. The design for barrel bikes is an emerald green, which is quite eye-catching as well as reflective for drivers, which is really good since it can help with safety. Barrel bikes are highly recognizable because of their color, which also alludes to an environmentally friendly impact, since green usually symbolizes nature and the environment when you look at color theory. For my initial research, I also looked at Lime bikes and Lime scooters. They're a worldwide organization having stations all around Europe, the US, Canada, and South America. They obviously spread pretty wide, but hold one of the biggest bike schemes in the world. They use a GPS scheme, so they're dockless bikes, you can pick them up anywhere just with your phone. And their design is bright green with yellow accents, obviously alluding to the lime. Their type of their fonts is quite geometric and fluid, but still has corners and is quite sharp. However, it kind of resembles bike paths, which I think is a reason they could have chosen it. Their logo is also very smart. They use a lemon slice, or a lime slice, which really resembles a bike wheel, connecting the name and the whole concept of the brand. Another thing I looked at with my research were the pros and cons of bike shares. I wanted to see the true benefits that the brand could have to a society and to a community like Barcelona. Some of the pros I read of were clean air, so how environmentally friendly bikes are, the convenience of them, so being able to skip out on traffic or just ride from point A to point B freely, or even just without having to bother to lock your own bike. They're also good for the development of the city, since they encourage the city to develop cycling routes and cycling paths for people to access, making the city therefore more environmentally friendly and encouraging the use of alternate transport that's not as polluting as cars. Another pro of bike shares are that they promote better cycling laws. Since bike shares have become more prominent, laws are becoming stricter and more precise, so people stay safe. And the final benefit I found was personal health, both physical and mental. Biking can help people mentally since it provides a time and space for mindfulness, as well as just the opportunity to be with yourself. And obviously, biking has a lot of physical benefits since it is exercise and it helps keep you active, alert, and alive. However, some of the cons I found, which weren't that many in comparison to the pros, were that bike shares don't provide helmets at all. However, I did find evidence that Barclays bikes are less likely to be in an accident than regular bikes or non-bike share bikes, and apparently it's because cars and motorists pay more attention not to damage these bikes since they belong to the city. But helmets are still a necessity and a requirement to stay safe while biking. Another con to bike shares are new bikers or people that aren't very experienced with biking, since they can be dangerous to other people or to themselves since they're not as familiar with biking around the city, which can be quite daunting the first times. However, overall, there is way more pros than cons, and some of the cons have easy solutions, such as the helmet. Bring your own helmet. There are things that it is very clear that bike shares would be beneficial to a community. So for my first tutorial, all I really did was pitch the BC idea. We hadn't had an opportunity to discuss ideas with tutors yet, so I wanted to get their approval before I actually started constructing something and had to change my idea. But I got quite a positive response to my concept. They both really liked the name and the idea of exciting people to join the movement of riding bikes and joining bike shares. Most of the tutors' comments proposed that I do further research, and they suggested that I play with the name a little, since the way I spelled BC was B-I-S-I, and the tutor said that for tourists and English-speaking people that might be read as Bi-C or Bi-Sci. So Rich proposed that I change it to BC without a second letter, because BE in Spanish is read B. So I ended up just removing a second letter altogether and having the letter B and C, which I quite liked, and I was very grateful for that feedback. Some other things that were proposed I explore were park and rides, so parking your car in designated areas to take the last length of your trip in public transport, and maybe consider the idea of ride and bike or park and bike. This idea of promoting biking as a substitute instead of as an always solution. Hannah also suggested I consider the tension between tourists and locals in Barcelona, since it's quite high lately, and I think that's important, especially because the brief says that the target for this bike hire is both tourists and locals. So I feel like it's important to research in order to know what I need to address. And then finally, the tutor suggested that I start looking at Barcelona for design inspo. Barcelona is obviously a very design-rich city, so they suggested I start looking at symbols and things that represent the city that could then be used in my brand as logos or just as recurring imagery. So after my tutorial, I started doing some further research on symbols of Barcelona, and there's obviously a lot of things that are representative of Barcelona, but I wanted to do something that wasn't generic. I looked at obvious symbols such as La Sagrada Familia, mosaics, El Parc Güell, El Camp Nou, La Torre Akbar, but I wasn't 100% compelled by any of them. They all seemed too tourist attraction-y for me, until finally I got to the Rose of Barcelona, the flower in the pavement. So the Flor de Barcelona is a design composed of 5 circles, an initial circle, and then 4 petals constructed from other circles. And it's a design widely used along l'Eixample, which is an area of Barcelona, but it's also involved in other areas. Sometimes the flower is also used for wayfinding, which I thought could be an interesting thing to consider in incorporating my project. I also did further research into park and rides, which is a very proliferant form of transport in England, but I'd never heard of it before. However, when doing further research, I realized that Bithing has a similar concept in place in Barcelona, but instead of encouraging people to park and ride, they encourage people to do parts of their trips in public transport and the rest by biking. They do this by including wayfinding in the metro stations and nearest bus stations that show you where the nearest Bithing stations are. And I think this is a very good way to incorporate and encourage people to actually use the Bithing service. I also looked at how tourists and locals are clashing in Barcelona right now. I wanted to explore what needs to be fixed and how my brand could fix that. So there's currently a lot of tension because the tourist population has quickly increased over the past 3 years, which limits resources and drives prices up, which obviously impacts people, especially of lower income. So this research, more than anything, made me ask the question, how can bike sharing help unify a community, and how can my brand communicate that? After my tutorial, I started experimenting with some designs as well, since I had to get around to actually creating something instead of just conceptualizing it. I was pretty sure I wanted my brand to include the color green, since green is usually used for environment and nature. And I also knew I wanted to avoid reds and yellows, since red, white, and blue and black are the official colors of Bithing, and red and yellow are the official colors of Catalunya. So I thought they would be a little overdone, so I wanted to steer away from that. So I started leaning towards cool colors. My initial palette included was a gradient from yellow to blue. And even though I was a little hesitant on the yellow, I felt like the placing with the other colors made it way cooler than it would have been next to a red. And I think it worked with the identity well. So when I started experimenting, what I did is I created a gradient, and then I created a tile pattern on top of it in order to replicate mosaics. But with further research, I saw that Bithing was currently rebranding themselves, and their new identity included mosaics. So I decided I wanted to steer away from that. I also wasn't too happy with how it looked, and the current design I had, I felt didn't really replicate or communicate bike share in any ways. So I decided to scrap it, and I started looking at the Flor de Barcelona, which again is the tile pattern featured across l'Eixample and other areas of Barcelona. It was very interesting to use the flower for experimentation. First of all, one of the things I really liked about it was the fact that it wasn't a tourist thing, a tourist attraction, or like something you'd particularly go to Barcelona to see, but it's still reminiscent of the city, and it's still understandable as an icon of it. And this way it also appeals more to locals as well as tourists, because it's this mix of patriotism with excitement about the new city you're in. So with the flower, I started experimenting by making letter forms out of the shapes. So because it's made out of 5 circles, it's quite easy to play around with, but I knew I wanted to use that curve of the petals as well. So I created a new color palette based on a palette recommended to me by Procreate, and this new palette featured warm orange, pink, blue, and green, more like a turquoisey green. But I liked this new palette way better. It was funner, brighter, and more active, which is what I wanted the brand to be. I used the flower for the letter forms of S and B, but however, the back of the B didn't look too great. The S was formed out of one of the petals and the center ring of the flower, while the B was formed by half of the flower. So I started experimenting with the shape of the B, which was a little too curved for my opinion and didn't sit quite right, didn't read like a B. So I experimented with adding like half a circle in order to provide a straight back, but it still wasn't great. However, after finagling around, I was a little more satisfied with the logo. However, I still feel like things didn't sit right with each other, but I was way more excited about where this project was going. After incorporating the Flor de Barcelona into my designs, I had my second tutorial with Hannah. She proposed a couple of things that were wrong, and I agreed. I feel like the logo wasn't working quite right, so she suggested that I look at some geometric typefaces, both design projects and pre-existing typefaces. She also suggested that I play around with the height and the weight of the B, since it didn't sit that well with the other letters. She suggested that I also contrast the logo or the flower I was creating with the imagery, since the imagery is a very big identifier of the flower, and when doing research, I didn't really find any design projects that altered the flower as much as used it as part of their imagery. Hannah also suggested that once I've settled on a logo, I try experimenting with patterns for my bike stand, since the flowers already come in a repetitive pattern and are quite consolidating of its identity. I thought it would be appropriate to have maybe repeating patterns, but I experimented with all kinds of different patterns as well. Hannah was also very excited and she really liked my playing around with overprinting and different colors and mixing around the opacities, since it allowed to create visual layers even though it was a flat image. After my tutorial, I conducted a bit more research. Since I still felt a bit stuck, I knew what needed to change. I just didn't really know how or what to change it to. So I looked into Catalan artist Joan Brossa. He's a visual and concrete poetry artist, and his work was very interesting in regards to patterns. I really liked seeing how he used patternicity and repeating type in order to create mystery, effect, or an image. I also looked into the book Dramatic Colors by Overprinting, which Hannah suggested, and I was really grateful. I thought it was very interesting to see how colors interacted with each other, and it was very helpful in helping me decipher why my colors weren't working right, because when I was overlayering them, they created quite a muddy color that I wasn't quite happy with. So using this book as reference, I ended up changing the color palette of my project and substituting the bright orange for a lilac purple, which worked way better with the other colors and made the mixture of them way more pleasant to the eye. And this was done because Dramatic Colors by Overprinting shows you how color combinations work and how the main 11 printing colors can interact differently. I also looked at geometric type, as Hannah suggested, which was quite helpful. I looked at artist Luc Devroy, who's also a computer scientist and mathematician, mainly a computer science and mathematician, but he also has a lot of interesting design work and typeface work, and he also has an encyclopedia of typefaces, which was incredible. I'd never seen it before, and it was super helpful in helping me find the resources to find other type. Using this resource, I found the designer Ami Littlefair, which I really liked her work. She had like geometric solid typefaces that really worked well, and you could see the individual blocks. So I decided to experiment with that for my work too. I started playing around with more solid shapes instead of with the shapes of the flower, using circles instead, since that is a recurring pattern in the imagery of the flower. I played with overprinting and the letter forms, and even though I got to a B and an I quite liked, I couldn't really figure out the S. Thankfully, I managed to snag a tutorial with Rich, a quick little mini tutorial, which really helped me decide where to go. In my mini tutorial with Rich, he suggested some things I could do in order to proceed, because I felt quite stuck at this point. I didn't know how to edit my type or my logo for it to look good. And Rich suggested I try incorporating pre-existing fonts into the logo instead of trying to create all the letter forms myself, which makes a lot of logical sense. I'm just a little ambitious at times. But this was a big turning point for me, since it helped me finalize my logo afterwards. Rich also suggested I play around with the S a little more, rounding out curves and just playing out with the details, but he really liked the S form from my original experiments with the Barcelona flower. He also said that maybe the S could work on its own and it could be the only special character, that not everything needed to be a letter form, and then the S could work as a logo or a pattern by itself, which I really liked, and ended up incorporating my work using the S as a pattern for the flower, and then the flower in a recurring pattern. This tutorial was very helpful for me, since it made me feel a little more motivated and like I wasn't as behind as I thought I was. So I was very grateful for the opportunity to be able to chat for a couple minutes in order to further my work. After my mini tutorial with Rich, I started looking into pre-existing geometric typefaces. Some of my favorites included Blippo, Horatio, and finally the one I settled for, ITC Rondo. I really liked the way that ITC Rondo worked with the S I already had, but I also liked the way that it interacted with the letter shape, using corners where there would usually be rounded and vice versa, which I thought was very interesting and worked very well with the harsh corners and then soft curves of the S I was using. Choosing this typeface also made me edit my S a little, squaring out corners that were previously pointed in order to make it more cohesive throughout the logo. Once I'd settled on a typeface, I started making my logo by using the S and then alternating that, making that into the flower of Barcelona. Then I experimented with different things. I started playing around with alternating patterns, having it almost like a crisscross or like a chessboard. And I also continued experimenting with overlayering. Hannah had also suggested I experiment with playing around with a dot in the middle of the S, or maybe using a circle to carry out throughout all the imagery. So I played around with that using the color that was produced by all the colors overlayering. And I liked it, but I don't think it worked as well. I think it translated as it being the same thing, but I think it felt unnecessary in the logo already. So I decided to not use it. At the end, for the logo, I settled on 3 different logos in 3 different colors. Instead of overprinting the flowers, I decided to have them all in one color based on the color of the S. So using my color palette, I created a blue logo, a green logo, and a pink logo, which I think all worked very well and could be applied in different contexts and branches of the brand. The brief requires that we make a bike wrap. So for this, I used the pattern I ended up settling with, which was an alternating pattern with colors. So using the 3 different colors. So they ended up making diagonal shapes with them colors. I also referred to the spacing used in the actual panots, which are 20 by 20. And I thought using that same structure would be cohesive and make it more understandable that the flowers are meant to be the flowers of Barcelona. I ended up using the pattern for the bike wheel cover at the back. I then included the name and the logo in the sticker up front, as well as a website and phone number. And I put a tagline in the bike. I wasn't sure what I wanted yet, so I experimented around with different names and different taglines using the body copy I'd previously come up with, and ended up landing in Sí a Barcelona, which is Say Yes to Barcelona. The brief highlights the fact that biking isn't really about biking, it's about the city you're in and the space you are going through with biking. So I thought it was very, very important to have Barcelona at the core of the brand. I also included the flower in the pedal cover, since they both have circles in the middle, and I thought that translated really well and also looked like simulated the movement of the pedals, which I quite enjoyed. I also made the bike in 3 different colors, but ended up settling for 2 different types of bikes: blue bikes and green bikes. Green bikes would be used as traditional bikes, and blue bikes would be electric bikes. I decided to incorporate electric bikes into the brand because VisCom has recently incorporated electric bikes into theirs, and I know that electric bikes are suddenly becoming more and more popular, and I thought it would be important to offer the option in order to further the brand. Hannah had suggested the idea of posters as one of the additional touch points, and I quite like that. It being a new bike hire, I thought it would be important to get the word out, but I also thought it would be a good opportunity to really show what the brand stands for. I started experimenting with a lot of flat colors, just using a plain base and big dramatic text. Again, using ITC Ronda, which I really liked how it worked since it almost looked like bike paths. The flat colors looked a little boring at first. I didn't know what to do that much, and so I started experimenting around with the patterns. I tried to reference the Diagonal, which is a street that crosses Barcelona, and Barcelona runs in a matrix pattern, so I thought it would be interesting to try to simulate the blocks with the flowers and then using Diagonal to cut through the streets of Barcelona, like Barcelona actually works. However, I don't think that design turned out really strong. I didn't like the color I was using for the font, which was black, since it contrasted really heavily with the pastels. But using lighter colors made the text get lost because there was already too much going on around it. So I decided to continue experimenting with solid colors. Once I finally, what I did, continuing to experiment with solid colors, I used the pastel versions instead of the bright versions, since I think it matched better with the brand identity, but was also softer and less screamy, as bike hires tend to be. Thus why I also chose white as the base of my bicycle, since I wanted to go against what we normally see with bike shares. For the posters, I continued experimenting with the design, and once I settled on the type, I saw that there was a large blank space, and I thought that would be good for some imagery, so I decided to create some short animations. They were quick hand-drawn animations of people on bike. I created two, one for each poster, and then they both come together in the last poster. For the posters, I came up with 3 different taglines, which are the core of BC's ethos, which are say yes to BC and to a united Barcelona, say yes to BC and an active Barcelona, say yes to BC and a green Barcelona. And I think I translated this very well throughout the posters. I think that these 3 core concepts really tackle what bike hires can do for a city, and they really bring together this idea of together we're stronger, let's make a better community. And I really like that. I really wanted my brand to reflect that. For my final additional touch point, I decided to make some bracelets that would work as cards in order to release the bikes. So the bracelets would be cloth and include a little plastic chip, and then you could use this in the stations in order to release the bicycles. The design of the bracelet was quite straightforward. The cloth part included the pattern of the flowers, and the front of the bracelet was the logo and the name of the company. On the back side of the bracelet, it would include a phone number, a website, an email, and then your personal PIN number, which is the one you'd need to activate your account using the bracelet. For wayfinding, I created a map to use on bike stands. The map would show all of Barcelona and show all the BC stops available using the little center circle of the flower. They would be applied in 2 colors, one green and one blue, to show if it's either a traditional or an electric bike station. And you can see wherever they are whenever you're near in a BC stand. There's also a smaller map which shows you a more concentric area near BC stands, as well as your current location using the pink flower. I quite liked the idea of the map, since while doing research I saw that a lot of stands included maps. I thought it was important to include that in mind as well, and it did work as a piece of wayfinding. For my other wayfinding, I decided to use the tiles in Barcelona with the actual flower as a way to communicate near bike paths and show where BC stands are. So the logo of BC would be applied inside the flower in either vinyl or paint, depending, because Barcelona is quite active and supportive of services like this, and they could appear near bike paths or near VC stands for you to know that you're approaching one of them. The flowers would also be pink, since pink is the designated wayfinding color, while blue and green work for the bikes themselves. Finally, for wayfinding, I decided to include signage in metros, since I saw it was something that VSync was already implementing, and I thought it was very smart, since it pushed the idea of ride and bike, which is something I wanted to incorporate in my brand anyways. So I mocked up some metro posters that show you the direction of the nearest VSync stand. Overall, I'm very happy with my outcomes. I was quite nervous at first because of the time constraints, but I think I managed to time myself and pace my work very well. Even though I had a few rough patches and there's still some things that I feel need retouching, I'm very excited about my outcome, and I definitely want to submit it to D&AD. I feel like a lot of my final outcomes and work was influenced by research, and I think that's an essential part to any project, and that's what we believe here at Shorts Design. We thank you for watching this video and hope you'll stick with us for the next behind the scenes of our next project.